Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I once again pay tribute to the Honourable Gentleman for Tiverton for securing this debate. I think the level of interest that there's been shows how much of a desire there is right across the country to protect this incredibly important institution. He was encouraged by the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent North, I think, to lead the campaign by setting up a Zoom call for us all to contribute. It seems to me what he's done is to create a sort of face-to-face Zoom call here that might be familiar to some of us who were here before the coronavirus era, but a way for us all to get into the same room and discuss this, which was great. And taking up the challenge set by the Honourable Gentleman for Cleethorpes, I think it is incredibly important to recognise the contribution that the BBC makes in my area, not just with Sunday Politics, but also with radio stations like Radio Sheffield and Radio Derby, and of course to recognise the broader role of local media with the Derbyshire Times and Peak FM, and who absolutely do ensure that as local members of Parliament we're held to account, that we're able to be able to communicate with our local communities, but also to be on the receiving end of some wise and frank advice from our local constituents about these issues. And it is incredibly important for our democracy that we are not just 650 people here to serve our parties, but we are people here to serve our local communities, to hear about local issues, to be asked about those local issues, and to respond to those local points. And that is the role that Sunday Politics plays. And there's no way that a politics programme for England would be able to do that. The idea that the issues that my constituents care about in Chesterfield and the local issues in the North East and local issues in Cornwall are all the same is just nonsense. And that local holding to account that Sunday Politics does is incredibly important. Now, as the Member of Parliament, very happily, yeah.
Grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Does he agree with me that now is a particularly bad time for the BBC to be considering this? As we've learned over the last few months, we've already heard in the previous contribution about devolution to metropolitan mayors and the like, which need extra examination. But our response to COVID has been led in very large part by our county councils and our second-tier councils, as well as the local resilience forums. These are increasingly powerful and increasingly relevant to our constituents and the population of the regions. So now, more than ever, we should be focusing on this as the BBC and not withdrawing from it.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think that the coronavirus has brought into very sharp focus the need for a local response, the extent to which local areas are experiencing what's a global pandemic in different ways. And so we saw in London it hitting really hard up front. We've then seen regional variations as it's gone on. We've seen differences in the local response. We've seen local CCGs responding differently in terms of testing, in terms of availability of PPE, and the public need to be able to learn about this locally, but also to scrutinise and question their politicians on that response. And we've seen government ministers stood at the dispatch box being asked to respond on a national basis. But we also need to be held to account locally for what's happening on testing, on PPE, on care homes and all of those sort of things in our local area.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I don't know if it's as sad as I am that over the recent weekends I've switched on the Parliament channel and you can see the coverage of virtually all the general elections that have been since television started covering it. One of the really interesting factors from those programmes from the BBC archives is that the swing across the country in 1955 was almost uniform. In 1959, the commentators were shocked when there was a slightly smaller swing to the Conservatives in the North West. It was a big change, and we are living in an increasingly diverse country. And countries, of the 4 countries of the United Kingdom. Doesn't he agree with me that that means that there should be more regional coverage, not less?
Once again, I absolutely agree. I think it was Tip O'Neill who's credited with the phrase "all politics is local." And of course, in the last general election, we saw that more strongly than ever before. I represent Chesterfield, an area that was surrounded when I came into Parliament by Labour seats just back as long ago as 2010. There's been a big change in our area. Similarly, in the cities, a change in the opposite direction. And so, I'm very conscious of that. And I think also, I think colleagues like my friend my honourable friend from Plymouth, that it's particularly important in those areas where there is maybe less representation from one party, that people in that area get to hear a voice from the Labour Party, or in areas where Labour is very strong, that they get to hear a voice from the Conservative Party. And I think that Sunday Politics does that, and it is incredibly important to ensure that in areas where there is a minority of one party, that voice is still heard, and it's heard in a local dimension. Now, as the Member of Parliament for Chesterfield, I have both the privilege and the slight irritation somewhat of being straddled between 2 areas. So some of my constituents, or the majority of my constituents, watch the Yorkshire version of Sunday Politics and regional news, but we also have the East Midlands covering us, and different people within my constituency watching different programmes. And because of that, I'm very minded when I've been on the 2 different programmes of how different they are and how they reflect the different issues there are in West Yorkshire at one end, and down in sort of Northamptonshire at the other end of the East Midlands coverage. And I think it gives that strong sense to me of how different those areas are. And my constituents, I know, very much appreciate appearances that I don't know if they appreciate my appearances, but they certainly respond to the appearances that I make, and appreciate that local coverage. And I noticed that the Sunday Politics East Midlands Twitter account has now been taken down. So the BBC, someone in the BBC has made this decision to take the Sunday Politics East Midlands Twitter account, whilst apparently we're still in this review, where people could go and see the coverage that the Sunday Politics East Midlands team have done. And recent programmes on the East Midlands Sunday Politics have brought a local dimension to national stories. So we hear a lot about HS2 on a national basis, but we are able to debate what it means locally in the East Midlands. And in the East Midlands, we have areas like Chesterfield, like Derby and Nottingham, who are served by the East Midlands. We have other areas where HS2 provides a blight but doesn't provide a service, and that's a very different perspective to the national debate about HS2. And I really worry, Madam Deputy Speaker, if the Sunday Politics East Midlands disappears, how will the people of the East Midlands learn about the latest prediction of the Honourable Member for North West Leicestershire about when HS2's scrappage is going to be announced? I don't know how they would ever find that out. Every 6 weeks or so he comes on to tell us it's about to be cancelled, and I worry without the Sunday Politics East Midlands programme how they'd find that out. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I know that I enjoy Ian Gentleman's contributions. I know he's a big thinker on these things, and the DCMS Select Committee, of which I'm fortunate to be a member, is doing a big inquiry at the moment into public sector broadcasting. And really, what he's saying, everybody's saying, goes to the heart of what do we want a public sector broadcaster to be? Do we want hundreds of thousands of pounds spent on salaries for small niche programmes on national network television? Do we want a commercial entity like Radio 2, financed by the taxpayer, by our constituents, on penalty of going to prison if they don't pay it? Or do we want the sort of coverage that he's talking about? Ultimately, as we lead up to Charter Review, and the Select Committee report will feed into that, I'm sure, into the thinking of ministers, this is really about what sort of public sector broadcaster do we want to have, isn't it?
Well, it absolutely is. And I'm also very minded that local radio particularly, and local media, is very much under threat. You know, we've got the mentioned previously Peak FM, which has been a great small local radio station in my area, now recently been taken over, I think, by Bauer, and their programming is going to go to the East Midlands. So you now get told, if there's a traffic jam just outside of Corby, that it's local news to you. It makes no difference to people in Chesterfield. And so as the local dimension of the private sector media increasingly diminishes, then there's an opportunity for the BBC to say, look, this is what we're great at. You know, of course we're going to compete on a national basis with the national programmes on a Saturday evening, but this is what is special about the BBC, and if they will lose that at their peril. If the BBC lose the programmes like Inside Out and Sunday Politics, lose that sense of their ability to influence things locally, they will really rue the day, and I think we will all be the poorer for it. And I think other people have mentioned, the Honourable Gentleman from Tiverton particularly mentioned, about the extent to which the sense that if something happens in London, it is national news. You get flooding in London, you get riots in London, it's something we should all care about. And we all know when we get flooding in different areas, you know, it's much more difficult to get local coverage. And I accept entirely the point the Honourable Gentleman from Beckenham made about, you know, London having local news too. But there is a strong sense for many of us who are more distant from London that what happens in London is given greater import than what happens in our areas. And we're going to have the local election 2021, and we all know that what happens in London is going to be seen as though it's national news. And of course, you know, the London mayoralty isn't a very important national post. But there's elections everywhere, and those elections everywhere are important. It's important that they are covered, and I think that is not what's going to happen if these programmes disappear. There's other things I could say, but I'm going to end it there because there's many others wanting to get into this debate. But I'll say finally, thank you very much to the Honourable Gentleman for securing this debate, and I hope that the Minister, when he winds up, will give a really strong assurance that the strength of feeling in this debate will be portrayed to the BBC, and how crucial these programmes are to our constituents will be portrayed in the strongest possible terms.
Tobt.